I'd like to ask you to take your seats if you haven't gotten yourself situated just yet. We'll go ahead and get our program started this morning. I am Maria White, the Deputy Erie County Executive, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today. Together with the Department of Environment and Planning, I have worked hard with our team to plan the summit today, and I think we've got just an excellent program. So to get us kicked off, I'd really like to introduce our host today, West Seneca Supervisor Gary Dixon. West Seneca has been just a tremendous partner and excellent to work with. Would you please join me in giving the supervisor a big round of applause?
Thank you, Maria. Welcome to the County Executive. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and to see our new building. Before I start, I'd like to invite you, during a break, we have an art show of the works of Martha Birchfield, who's the daughter of Charles Birchfield, out in the atrium. Please check it out. So I think this is a very good topic to be discussing today. Affordable housing, whether it's rental or ownership, is kind of the bedrock of all of our residents' lives, right? If they don't have secure housing, they're not going to be able to do all sorts of other things, or focus on the family, focus on the job, etc. Especially affordable home ownership is important, and that's, for most people, that's their biggest investment. And if they own their home, then they're taking advantage of rising prices. They can develop equity, etc. So here in West Seneca, being a first-ring town, we are very interested in hearing from developers about ways that we can build more affordable housing, especially for ownership. Like Buffalo, we have an older housing stock, especially on the city line. And if developers have an idea that they can help us refresh that, perhaps our zoning laws are standing in the way. So we would be interested in modifying them, or entertaining ideas to modify them. But West Seneca is definitely interested in anything any ideas that people bring. We have one of our council members here, so it's a very good topic, and I really appreciate you all being here. Now I'd like to introduce our county executive, Mr. Mark Pollenkars.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, and it is our pleasure to be here today in this beautiful new community center. There's not many of them that are like this in Erie County, and I just want to say to the people of West Seneca, you have one of the nicest community centers around, so good job to all. And thank you all for joining us here today for this important discussion on affordable housing. You know, everyone deserves access to safe, healthy, and affordable housing so that they can build their dreams. And we often talk about the home as being the foundation for their dreams to be built. And as we know, for too many individuals in our region, they do not have an affordable house where they can truly build their dreams. Our region is desperate for more affordable housing. But as we know, this is not just an issue in Erie County or Western New York, but it's a nationwide problem. But unlike other areas where they're just kind of throwing up their hands and saying, what do? We decided to bring you all here together so that we can come up with ideas to find better ways to create more affordable housing for our region. I look at this, and having talked to my colleagues across the United States, as one of the #1 issues that's facing our country is actually affordable housing. We may not necessarily think about it in everything that's gone on, and certainly with a lot of the issues that we've dealt with in our region, but long term, ensuring that we have affordable housing for our communities and our country to grow is a key facet that we have to address. And if we don't address, we're going to create further dichotomies in our country as to the haves and have-nots, and communities that thrive and others that fail. In 2019, I announced my Live Well Erie initiative, which addressed how we can create a better life for all individuals in our community by looking at the social determinants of health. And one of the biggest social determinants of health, as we know, is housing. Where people live. Is it close to where they work? Are there transportation options in those regions, or the only way you can get around from that housing option is by an automobile, which if you own a car, you don't think of. But if you don't own a car, it is a serious concern because maybe you can't actually get to where you work or where you need to go to the grocery store and the like. So the idea of looking at affordable housing is very complex because it's not just about the building. It's not just about the neighborhood. It's about all the issues that relate to it, including issues such as transportation. We see on the screen behind me issues associated with affordable housing from not just our own Buffalo News, but New York Times and NPR as a national issue. And I believe the communities that address this are the ones that are going to move forward, and the ones that don't are going to be left behind. And for nearly a century, Buffalo and Erie County was left behind. We have this great renewal that's going on, but we do not want to put ourselves in a situation where we are left behind as a new generation comes forward. And so that's why it's very important that you are here today to discuss these issues and find ways in which we can create better, more affordable housing across the entire county. And as a representative of Erie County, it's a big county. Actually, Erie County is the same geographic size as the state of Rhode Island. We have more population than 5 states. We have urban, suburban, and rural areas, and in each of those areas, there are issues associated with affordable housing. And we have to address it in each of those areas. We can't just think of this as an issue in the city of Buffalo or an issue in your rural community. It is an issue across the entire region. And that's why we have the experts in this field to help you find a way to do that. I'm pleased that we're joined by Lenny Skrill from the Department of New York State Housing and Community Renewal Department, because he's going to tell you there's lots of money available to do these projects. Sometimes some of the developers will focus on a project just in an area that they're used to, but not knowing that there's other opportunities out there to invest, including in some very good projects that are needed, whether it's in the inner city or whether it's in the rural areas. Often, as I know, I practiced law for a number of years, including representing developers of all kinds, and they like to do the same thing one after another. They get good at doing the same thing. They don't want to get out of their little zone. But maybe by getting out of that zone, not only can it be really good for the developer, but it can be exceptionally good for the community and the needs of the community. So I want to thank Lenny, and you'll be hearing from him soon enough to talk about the various financing options that are available through New York State to address affordable housing needs. In Erie County, we receive millions of dollars of home funds on an annual basis from the federal government as part of our community development block grant program, working with our 34 consortium municipalities. We can put our money in those municipalities, but because of the rules associated with it, we can't put it in some and in every one of them in Erie County. That's why we want to work with our partners to find out, okay, if you want to build in one of these communities, we can't help you with our home funds, but we'll help you find the funds that are available, whether it's in big cities like the city of Buffalo or some of the larger towns where they take care of their own community development block grant funds. But we have a strong consortium of 34 municipalities that work together to identify what is the best use of these dollars. It's not like it just goes to one chosen developer, it goes to what is the best use. And the municipalities come together as a consortium to help make that decision so that everybody looks at this as a team effort. Because if you don't address affordable housing needs in one part of the county, you're going to leave that other part of the county behind, and as a result, you hurt the entire portion of the county and all the communities. So I want to thank our partners in the Erie County Community Development Consortium for all the work that they've done through the years to ensure that we can create a better community for all. Now, Erie County is going to work with our partners. We've always done this, we're going to continue to do that, whether it's not-for-profit, for-profit, community-based organizations, and local municipalities, to ensure that our home funds are going to the projects that are really needed for our communities. And my hope is with this housing summit, we not only understand the true issue as it relates to affordable housing in Erie County, but that we walk out of here with better ideas on how we can address it. It's one thing to know what the problem is. It's another thing to actually be able to go forth and try to fix it. And my goal is, by the end of the day, you'll have not only a stronger understanding of what the problem is across the entire community, but we'll all have a better idea of how to fix it going forward by working and collaborating with the individuals that are in this room. I want to thank the developers that are here. We have developers from as far away as Rochester who've come in to hear from the experts in this area and how they can better develop affordable housing in their communities. And if you're from Rochester here and you've never done a project here in Buffalo and Erie County, come on board, we want you here. So I want to thank each and every one of them for being here, and hopefully we can learn from you as well about what has worked in some of your projects you've done in the past and what has not. That's the best way to move forward, is to hear from those who've gone through the process, who understand where the pitfalls are, and how to create a better product, so to speak. So, and finally, I want to thank our Erie County Department of Environment and Planning, as well as Deputy County Executive Maria White. Dan Castle and his team from Environment and Planning have worked very hard putting this housing summit together, but it's not like something they didn't know how to do, because they're working on affordable housing every day. It's part of the mission of the Department of Environment and Planning, is to assist our community create more affordable housing options countywide. I'd like to say we succeed in every way possible, but we don't, and that's why we're here today, because we know we have more to do. It's as simple as that. We look forward to the conversation and learning from each other, because I think there's only one thing that can come out of this, and that's better housing options for the people of our community. And the more and better housing options we have for the people of Erie County, the stronger and better Erie County will be. I've said this before. Erie County, you can't have one section that's strong. You can't have a strong suburb and a weak in a rural section. You can't have a strong rural area and have weak urban center. You've got to have a strong community countywide for it to succeed and to be and reach our full potential as a community. And we can only do that if we offer affordable housing options across the entire community, and we reach the people who truly need it. So I want to thank you for being here today. I know that as a result of this, there will be a positive benefit to our community, because we will have more options, better understanding of the issues, and going forward, we will be a better and stronger community for it. Thank you all.
Thanks so much to the county executive. Things like this do not happen without vision and leadership. We don't get that without a strong leadership at the center of county government. Would you please join me in giving our county executive another round of applause? So, as the county executive presented the State of the County address earlier this year, he talked about this summit, and we are here today really to launch our Live Well Erie Housing Summit. You just heard the county executive touch briefly on the Live Well Erie initiative, launched first in 2019, just before the pandemic began in the late fall of 2019. And now we've got with us Karen Rybicki. Karen is the Erie County Department of Social Services first Deputy Commissioner. She is the co-chair of the Live Well Erie Housing Task Force, and she's going to talk to us today a little bit about what is Live Well Erie and what the accomplishments and work of the Live Well Erie Housing Task Force have been. Please join me in giving Karen a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So as Maria had mentioned, the Live Well Erie initiative started back in 2019. With Live Well Erie, there was one vision, and as the county executive alluded to, we want no residents within Erie County to be left behind. The initiative focuses on 3 different populations. So we're looking at the children within our community, working families within our community, and older adults within our community. It's set up with 5 guiding principles, and again, the county executive had talked a little bit about earlier in his speech with social determinants of health. So really focusing on social determinants of health. We also want to look at everything that we're doing through a racial equity lens. We also want to look at innovative thinking. The Department of Social Services, Erie County government, there's always initiatives that have been happening. But we really want to focus on how can we be innovative in our thinking around the way that we approach things, and also looking at the modernization of service delivery within our programs that we provide to residents of Erie County. Partnership and collaboration is so huge, which is why it's wonderful to see all of you here today around this. With Live Well Erie, within those 3 buckets of populations that I talked about, we've set up 9 goals that we really want to focus on. Within those goals, there's indicators and then strategies that we're going to use to meet those goals. And we have a multitude of partners across Erie County that have joined on to work with us. This just gives you a little bit of the steering committee had established 5 guiding principles that I had talked about a little bit earlier. So this just shows you those in a graphic. One of the main goals within our Working Families Initiative was to ensure that everyone within Erie County has safe, affordable housing, which is part of why we're here today to talk about some of those issues. Some of the things that we've talked about and that we started working on back in 2019 was really ensuring that we pass affordable housing policy and we use our adaptive reuse projects, and folks that are receiving tax incentives through the ECIDA is so important. We also have partnered with Benlick on the rehab of more owner-occupied properties within our county. We want folks to have home ownership, to be able to gain wealth and to be able to move themselves forward, as they progress through life. We also want to look at increasing the federal home funding from HUD and continue to build new units of affordable housing, which is great to see so many developers here today to be able to tap into those resources. One of the other things we talked about was educating municipal planning boards on strategies to increase affordable housing within our community, which is also why part of this initiative came up today in this housing summit, having you all here at the table. We're also looking at exploring the possibility of creating additional limited equity cooperatives to fund low interest mortgages and property tax reductions for the purpose of selling units in apartment buildings to low-income households. We've explored weatherization opportunities for families using heat. And as we know, so many of the properties within our county were built prior to 1970. So we continue to look at lead remediation across the board within those properties. As the county executive had stated, or the deputy county executive stated, I work for the Department of Social Services. I've been in social services for over 23 years. When the pandemic hit, we saw that there was a great need to stand up a task force to really focus on housing. Not that we weren't looking at that before, but we were in a critical period of time with so many people in crisis. One of the things, to the county executive's credit, that we did immediately, like in October of 2020, when the pandemic and folks were out of work, we stood up a program where we were able to assist 2,190 households across Erie County to provide assistance to them to pay their mortgages and their back rent, to the tune of $6.3 million that we were able to assist with. We also have applied for several other initiatives since that point. One of them was our Moving Forward Together grant, and with that grant, we're looking at planning. Part of it was planning, and then part of it was what can we do as we move forward within our community to ensure that folks have safe, affordable housing, that we can reduce the number of folks that are in our homeless shelters. That was something that really came to light throughout the pandemic, is the fact that, historically, we always had a chronically homeless population, but we had more and more individuals and families experiencing that situational homelessness. And because the costs of housing within our community, in some cases had doubled over the last 5 years, they were unable to find affordable housing. And the folks that were in our shelters, those length of stays were so much longer. So with that Moving Forward Together grant, once we got the planning grant, we were then awarded another $350,000 where we could really focus on strategies that we can reuse to prevent displacement, to solve homelessness, to prioritize folks gaining mobility with, throughout their life, to be able to move and expand and grow. Increasing capacity within our systems, again, within our shelter systems, within our affordable housing and supportive housing systems, and then working really with developers to develop that affordable housing. One of the other initiatives that we focused on was Built for Zero, and that was funding that we received to do planning and focus around our chronically homeless population. In 2021, we also developed a housing resource guide because we saw there was a need, not only with folks that were seeking assistance through social services, but the community in general. We wanted to make sure that individuals were aware of where they could go, what kind of resources were available, and what kind of help was out there for them. Also throughout the pandemic, and as we got through the eviction moratorium, for almost 2 years, we had folks that hadn't paid rent. Well, now once the eviction moratorium got lifted, now it became due. Some households owed thousands of dollars. So we really worked collaboratively with community-based organizations and partners within the legal system to develop a virtual hub that they could go to for resources and information around that. Two other initiatives that we've worked on is with our homeless shelters within Erie County. The county executive had put forth $1 million that we're using to be able to do capital improvements within those shelters, because by 2023, all of the shelters within Erie County, if we're going to be providing payment to them with public funds, need to become certified through New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. So that's been a huge initiative that through our housing task force we've worked on. And one of the last things is that we also applied to the New York State Department of Temporary and Disability Assistance for a $3.8 million grant that we would receive annually to provide rent supplements in Erie County. We know that there's funding, through HUD, but as probably all of you know in this room, there's waiting lists for that affordable housing. Folks might be waiting 5, 7, 10 years to get on that list. So for us, that $3.8 million annually that we could assist some low-income residents to pay their rent will be very helpful to us. This just gives you a graph of Live Well Erie and the partners that have signed on to date. So it's public, it's private, it's not-for-profit agencies, but so many partners have joined on because we really are focused on collaboration. We can't do this alone. And just to provide you with our Live Well Erie website is listed on the board here. And I encourage you, because I'm just giving you the Cliff Notes version about Live Well Erie, but for you to go on and explore further and get more details about Live Well Erie, what our guiding principles are, what some of the strategies that we're using. And the other thing I'll say is that we really are focused on benchmarks, measurements, and having indicators out there. So it's not just like we're saying we're doing all these wonderful things, but we're going to show you results on how we're going to achieve these things. You can also visit our partner page to become an official Live Well Erie partner and join on to our task force. And just to end this, by working together, we hope that all Erie County residents will live well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and I really do want to encourage folks to go check out our website at livewellerie.com to get more information about that initiative. The last slide that was up said, who's missing? Maybe the answer is you. Maybe you're missing and you haven't signed the Live Well Erie partnership card yet. We would really welcome your joining the Live Well Erie effort. I really just want to underscore one point that was made by Karen Ribicki and alluded to by the county executive. We have been talking about housing affordability for years, but we haven't always had the resources to make those investments. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government has finally opened up some of the spigots to provide resources to local communities to help address the issues that were grossly exaggerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And housing is one of those ways in which the federal government did provide additional funding. So part of why we're here today is because we do have money that we are able to help invest in these kinds of affordable housing projects in our community development block grant consortium area, like the county executive said. In the past, we've had to use the bully pulpit. We've had to talk about how we've got a need for housing affordability, but Erie County wasn't really able to be the kind of player that we wanted to be with the resources we wanted to put on the table. And now that has changed, and that is in part why we are gathered here today. Karen talked about that, the county executive talked about that. Without the resources, we know housing affordable, building affordable housing can be challenging, and now we've got those resources to add to the table. So moving on in our agenda, we've got our keynote speaker. It is really my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jason Knight. Jason is an associate professor of geography and planning at SUNY Buffalo State. He is also a former employee of the Department of Environment and Planning and has been a great friend and partner for many years. His applied research on housing, land use, and neighborhood change is guided by a personal belief that policy must be socially, racially, and economically fair and just. He is the co-author of 3 high-profile reports on housing in our region, including multiple analysis of housing in Erie County specifically. So Jason is really going to be our big picture thinker today and provide that big picture information. We are running a little bit ahead of schedule, so if we can entertain a Q&A with Jason, we'll try and build that in. And then after we get through our other speakers, we'll have a breakout session that will allow you to take the big picture that Jason is presenting and get right into the issues right in your community. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jason Knight.
Thank you, Maria. That's a little much. So I want to, I feel like anytime I get up in front of a group of people and I have the opportunity to talk about anything that I've done my work on, I always kind of feel like it's the last day of a camping trip where you take that 8-person tent and you roll it up and you realize they kind of gave you a 4-person bag, right? You can't fit it in there. So it's really, really hard to kind of jam something as complex as affordable housing into a 10 or 15-minute presentation, but I will try. So as Maria said, and first let me thank Supervisor Dixon for hosting us, the County Executive and Deputy County Executive, and Paul D'Orlando for inviting me here. The goal is to try to give you an overview, and a lot of you in this room are partners in this cause, and you know this information, and it's nothing new to you. Some of you sort of understand it from a sort of tangential standpoint, and then some of you are sort of first hearing about it today, and hopefully I will shed some light on the challenge that we face in our region. I want to define affordability first. I think that's the first step in this process. Then look at some national and local trends. What are we seeing in the affordable housing space in terms of need? And then we will, I will run through what I think are some incomplete and imperfect steps that local governments can take to address the issue in their communities. As Maria said, we will take a question or two if we have time, but I doubt it'll happen. I always seem to run long. So, when we back this up and sort of ask ourselves what is affordable housing, it's really actually 2 things. It is the threshold by which the federal government and local governments establish this number, right? We've all heard this number, which is 30%, right? We kind of call that housing cost burden. So any household that's spending more than 30% of their monthly income on housing is considered to be cost burdened. Real simple and straightforward, but if we dig a little bit deeper, also very complex measure. The second is an actual entire industry focused on the provision of affordable housing in any given region. So individuals like Brad Packard, who we'll hear from later, they try to address the issue that I will talk about today, which is this, what I kind of call an affordable housing crisis, if you will, that we have in our region. Why does this number matter, and where does it come from? It comes from a lot of places, and it's often challenged as inappropriate or incorrect. Transportation was mentioned earlier. The easiest way to maybe challenge the 30% is to consider that it does not actually take into account transportation costs. So if we build affordable housing units for renters in our suburban communities, and they're not on bus routes and they rely on that because they don't own a personal automobile, we should also consider the cost of automobile ownership for them when we calculate what the housing cost burden really is, which is housing plus transportation, right? But essentially what we understand when we look at this number is that when we understand a household spending 30 or 31 or 40 or 50% of their income on housing, it really limits their opportunity. Young children don't necessarily get fed on a routine basis, so if you're working in the school district or your community is dealing with this in the school district, you can really understand it quickly by asking your school administrators how many free lunches and free breakfasts they dole out, right? It impacts us in multiple layers of governance in addressing what are the outcomes of someone living in a household that's not affordable. So we want to understand that when we increase that affordability number, that sort of burden from 15 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50%, what we're doing is we're reducing a household's ability to live a full, complete life of opportunity. That fundamentally is what we're talking about at the end of the day. It's also important, I think, from the Buffalo and Erie County perspective to recognize that when we talk about 30%, we're really talking mainly about low and moderate income households. I think if we were all making $1 million and we were spending $300,000 a year on housing, we might not love it, but we wouldn't be starving, right? We would have every other thing that we need because we still have the rest of that rather large income to buy the things that we need or do the things that we would like to do. What we're really talking about is helping those low and moderate income households achieve some level of housing affordability that provides them an opportunity to live a full and complete life. So when we look at it, you know, most of the data that I have here today is really at the renter level. The supervisor mentioned home ownership, and that's critically important, but one of the challenges we have in our region is a really high level of low and moderate income households that will always, in most cases, be renters. The reality becomes not everyone who is low and moderate income can be a homeowner. And when we start to see the numbers, the absolute numbers of people spending 30 or 50% or more of their income on housing, we'll see that that is really a crucial challenge that we face. But there's some really good resources out there, and the one that I always tend to show in my housing course is the National Low Income Housing, now I'm going to mess it up, National Low Income Housing Coalition. They annually put out a report called Out of Reach, and I would highly suggest anyone that's really interested in this this area of research to sort of dig into this, because what it tells us early on in the report every single year is how much the average household would have to pay working at minimum wage, 40 hours a week, to afford a house, what a fair market rent unit in a given region. In New York State, and this is statewide, we'll dig a little bit deeper into Erie County here in a second. The housing wage in New York State is about $34 an hour, which comes up to be about $70,000 a year to afford a fair market 2-bedroom unit in any given region in the state. We know inherently that that's well below what minimum wage is in New York State. So the number is rather high. And it's obviously skewed for New York's, for most of downstate, so the Hudson Valley in the city of New York. The 2-bedroom wage in Erie County is $17.69, but still below minimum wage, significantly below minimum wage. So in our county, to afford a fair market rent 2-bedroom unit, you'd have to work at current minimum wage 56 hours a week. So it's not just a question of whether or not we can build enough housing to fill this massive gap. It's a real serious question about how it is that we pay people in our communities and the people that work for us and provide us services, right? So essentially, we have this massive challenge of income, right? And it's not a position I like to stand up here and sort of complain about, but the reality is very low incomes are really a large driver of our challenge in this region. We published the LISC and PPG funded 2-county housing needs assessment that was released last fall. In that, we calculated if we just increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour, we would reduce the number of households number of renter households that are living insecure by about 10%. Just a simple economic change, right? It would probably be less costly than continuing to try to build them housing units, but it's sometimes politically unfeasible to attack that. And the challenge is a lot of the jobs in our country and in our county that support households over and over and over again are generally lower paying jobs. They don't pay what is this sort of fair market 2-bedroom rent rate for anyone. So we do have a sort of secondary conversation outside the sort of how do we build question about how does that we pay. So if you haven't seen this, and for the nonprofit and affordable housing folks in the region, in the room, they've seen it. For those that haven't, it's available through LISC's website. My colleague and good friend and I published this report back in the fall. It is very detailed, it is very in-depth, and in many ways overly complex and overly complicated, but the findings I think are useful for our purposes here, and I think for our purposes as government officials at the local and county level, to really understand that the biggest issue that we found over and over and over again was affordability, affordability, and affordability. The more we looked at the data, the more the challenge became clear and obvious. We have a serious affordability crisis. And as I said earlier, the crisis is not necessarily just one of finding a way to address the demand. The demand will always be here insofar as we continue to have large numbers of households that are low and moderately income. As long as we have a poverty problem, we will have an affordability problem. So there's it's a secondary question about how it is that we pay people. But we are not Seattle, where someone can make a really nice wage and still be housing poor. People make very low wages here, and they will be perpetually, persistently housing poor. So when we think about this issue, and I think kind of what I'm trying to set the table here for is, when we look at the affordability question, I think there's a lot of belief and maybe myth that it is purely an urban challenge. And that's because we pack a lot of the challenge in a very small geography. And so when we do that, we essentially, from a geographic perspective, we cluster that problem in a very confined space. And by doing so, we minimize the way we view that same problem over a larger geography outside the central city. Another way of saying that is the majority of the problem is actually outside the city of Buffalo. It just happens to be dispersed along a much larger geographic area, right? So it's almost 50-50, which is, the challenge is 50% an urban, purely central city, principal city challenge, and a suburban and rural challenge. So when we look at it, we have to recognize that in your community, wherever it is that you're from, and many of you are not from the city of Buffalo, when you look at your community, you have this problem. It might be understated, it might be ignored to pretend that it does not exist, but it exists in every single community in this county. So when we look at it, oops. So when we look at the numbers, right, I'm here because of numbers, right, we have tons of numbers. When we look at it, it does undeniably exist, and we look at above average rent burden, right, again, we're just talking about rent burden here. When we look at above average rent burden, so 30% of your income or more, we see communities that are above average, which is the county average. We see communities that are suburban, rural, and urban, the city of Buffalo, right? So it is not a problem we can just conveniently pack into the city and say, well, it's your challenge, you fix it. So when we look at it across the board here, outside of Marilla, which is sort of an outlier in Sardinia, almost in most cases, about 1 in 3 households that are renters in all of our communities are rent insecure or housing insecure. So we do have a widespread, wall-to-wall, border-to-border challenge of affordability for renters in this community. We are going to continue to have that problem, and I didn't dig into the homeowner affordability question, but you guys all know we are seeing a massive increase in housing prices. It's significantly impacting potential first-time new home buyers. But essentially, for many first-time home buyers, you can still get in, if you're making median rent or median income in this region, you buy a median unit, you're generally doing okay, right? And you're probably credit-worthy by the bank standard, and you're not going to be perpetually a renter. So when we think about the bigger challenge, and I think the more disturbing number here is, and I think that's an appropriate term to use, is that more than half of our renters in this county spend more than 50% of their income every single month on rent, right? So just think about what that means to have less than 50% of your monthly income available to you to shelter, or to house, to put food on the table, to put clothes on your kids' back, right? To pay for medical expenses that you have to continue to forego, right? It's a significant social household challenge. So how do we address the issue? Well, I think I would say this. This list is absolutely imperfect and not contextually appropriate for every single place. My line is usually there's many ways of moving forward, but only one way of standing still. If you're just standing still, then nothing's going to help you. You have to find ways to address the issue. For me, if someone who worked in land use and housing and have kind of done a lot of different things, so jack of all trades, master of none stuff, You know, when I look around our region, the first thing I would tell local governments outside of the central city is, hey, you need to review your zoning codes and identify whether or not you can build the types of units that developers want for affordable housing construction. It's critically important to understand that many of our obstacles in the suburban communities are actually zoning codes. When we look at them, zoning is invariably one of the biggest obstacles. A conversation that Brad and I just had a little bit before this started. The second thing might be to just understand in your community, where can you build, right? Is there development opportunities in your community, particularly vacant spaces or even vacant buildings? And then you might have to cross-check that with your zoning code and see if your zoning code actually permits you to do multifamily with those units. Speaking to some of the developers in the room, they know that the review, development, approval process in most municipalities can be lengthy, time-consuming, and costly. And so streamlining that to the extent that's legally possible outside of, you know, within the sort of confines of seeker and other approval would be useful. As was said earlier, work with local developers to understand what it is they're looking for and how it is that they operate, so that you have an understanding of what they're looking for in your community, or maybe some of the obstacles that they face. It needs to be a relationship that is a mutually beneficial partnership. You can't treat developers that want to come to your community with a sort of hands-off approach. It needs to be collaborative. Also work with, you know, rural outreach centers. An example Frank will talk about in a little bit. One of the key things I think for communities is to have a conversation with your neighbor communities about what they're doing, and maybe address the way we can do this together more efficiently, more effectively. One of the key issues that we see is, and this is sort of the second to last bullet, and then I'll be done, is you have these, as I said before, you have this challenge in your community. There are households and voters, if you're an elected official in your community that vote for you, that are rent burdened. So it probably needs to be some level of outreach and education within your community to make people recognize that the immediate reaction to affordable housing development in your community is not NIMBYism. It's not to stand up and say, we're not doing this here. You should be doing it everywhere. It's needed everywhere, right? So some level of education to dispel the myth that this problem is going to bring in people from outside your community is something that's really warranted. I've worked in planning and development before, I mean, decades ago, it seems like. That was an honest conversation that was had in many communities about projects that were brought before them that we proposed, about who you're bringing into our community. How about we just reframe that and ask, how are we housing our own residents, right, in our own places? And then lastly, this is sort of a shameless plug, you need to build some internal capacity at the local level. In many ways, that is, in most governments don't have planners, and I'm not up here to say that planning will solve all the problems or solutions. But as a planner myself, I feel like one of the biggest obstacles at the local level is not having a point person in local government that has the capacity and skill set to work with developers to address the issue in the community. If it has to keep running through mayor's offices, even part-time mayor's offices, supervisor's offices to get work done, it's very, very inefficient and ineffective. So that internal capacity building, I think, is a critically important step that's necessary. I'll take a question or two if we have time. If not, I will gladly sit down.
I think we don't actually.
Good.
Have
Thank you.
I really want to encourage you to reach out to Jason. Jason's contact information is provided in your folders that you received at the time of registration. Also, Jason will be sticking around for a little bit, so please do talk to him a little bit further with any of your questions. And I think the point that Jason was making around housing affordability being an issue everywhere is, again, part of why we are gathered here together, because we know that we need to put more resources on the table to support residents in our very own community. So to help us do that are some of the resources that are coming from state government. And to help us talk about that and understand that is Assistant Commissioner to New York State
Homes and Community Renewal Agency, or also known as HCR, Lenny Skrill. Lenny is a graduate of the University of Buffalo and has lived in Buffalo for over 30 years and is a housing affordability expert. Please join me in giving him
So, I think I've been in Buffalo, try to think about this, I've been in Buffalo since 1973, so that's almost 50 years. I haven't lost my Bronx accent, but I've been here a long time. So, I just want to introduce myself. I don't recognize a lot of people here. I've worked for, I'm from a real estate family in New York City. I work for a community-based not-for-profit in the city of Buffalo. The last 38 years, I've worked for New York State Homes and Community Renewal. In that, I have 3 gigs for the agency. I manage a small office in the Ellicott Tower, you know, for mostly field staff that serve the, you know, like communities in the western portion of the state. I do a lot of what I'm increasingly being asked to do what I call intergov work, which is sort of like semi-political type things for the agency in terms of messaging to state and local and federal officials. But my primary gig has been basically to coordinate HCR's multifamily housing investments in basically every county in the state of New York, with the exception of Westchester and Rockland County. I basically have flitted around New York State as a sort of helping people, sort of listening to people's stories, tell them how they can pay for their deals and solving problems. And that's really, and so I have some cool news to let you know. I mean, so about 4 years ago, Governor Cuomo proposed a housing plan to expand HCR's resources by $20 billion. I mean, I've heard about millions. I haven't heard too many people with billions. So and basically, it was really successful. So during the course, our goal was to expand supply by 100,000 units across the state, with 7,000 supportive. We exceeded those numbers, and we were very successful in doing it across the state. So what happened this year? So, you know, we were getting to the latter stages of the program, and we were going to run out of the resources we're allocated. The governor proposed, and the state legislature approved a $25 million plan. So, does that sound like a lot of money for the people in the audience? Look, it's just chump change. The reality is that we have an incredible amount of resources to help sponsors develop affordable housing. The backdrop of this session is really a side trip. I'm a pretty obnoxious guy at times. So I sort of, if I see things that I think are frustrating, I sort of like pick a scab. So my challenges in Erie County is, you know, I can pick that comparison to what's going on in Onondaga County and Monroe County. Erie County is not doing as much activity outside the city of Buffalo as Monroe County and Onondaga County is. So I took Paul on a side trip. I picked one township in Monroe County, town of Henrietta. And basically, over a course of 10 years, in the town of Henrietta alone, we did more housing activity in Henrietta than we did in the entire county of Monroe, a county of Erie outside of the city of Buffalo. And I think my motivation there was to sort of get Paul and the county thinking about how it can do a better job creating an environment that affordable housing developers develop in the county of Erie. I don't have any problem with the city of Buffalo. I have the great Yvonne McCrae to work with in the city, and we've worked with both friends and colleagues for at least 25 years. I don't know when you started a flare.
03.
03. So we've been buddies forever. I don't have the problem doing these projects in the city of Buffalo. The challenge is doing them outside the city of Buffalo. So how do you, I can go through all our programs. It's not that important. I have lots of monies, given, I can do projects from zero, for people at 30% of area income, to 50% of area income, to 90% of area income, 130% of area income. I can combine it with market rate. My message to you in the audience, and to either the elected officials or sponsors, tell me your story, and I'll tell you, if it has an affordable housing component, I can tell you how to pay for it. Now, is that a good deal? I mean, can I pick on you, Susan and Brad? Would you find that that I'm accessible to? Susan, do you think Mike and Lisa from Conifer find me accessible?
You're our first call.
I'm here probably 8 o'clock at night.
The reality is that I'm an evangelist for this stuff. How many people work for government? So I'm 66 years old. I've worked for state government for 38 years. I have no debt. Is there any real rationale from a business point of view as a state employee why I'm working? What do you think? There isn't any. I do this work because it's my avocation. Okay? I don't have to work. My son's, is in a PhD program. He's going to make 3 times as much money as me. I have no debt, and I'm still working. Why? Because the work's important to me, and I do it because I want to, and that's why I do it. So if you reach out to me, or there's 2 ways to deal with me. I can give you my email address, but just to give a shout out to Paul here, I would love Paul to deliver me. So if you reach out to Paul and talk about, well, I would like to see if the state can help me finance this or that, I think it's the appropriate giving the credit to Paul for initiating this type of stuff. But you can also reach out to me. The best way to deal with me is email. If you call me, you will get voicemail. Okay, but I'll give you my email address. leonard.skrill@hcr.ny.gov. But if you want to just go through Paul and say, can you link me up with Lenny? That's fine. I have programs that can do over 100 units at a time. Where's Lori? How many units are we renovating in Amherst right now?
When Bloker's developed, that'll be 93. Right?
And what about what's going on with Related Group? How many projects are renovating?
Oh goodness, that was 4 different complexes throughout town. At least 1,200.
Okay, we can do 1,200 projects at a time, right? We did 201 Ellicott, 200 units. We can do really large projects. We can do projects from 40 to 80 units. That tends to be what we call unified funding. We have a new program that we're collaborating with Community Preservation Corp on called Small Buildings that can go from 5 to 40. You tell me your story, or tell Paul to reach out to me. I'll listen to your story. If it has an affordable housing component, we can do it. I'm just picking something out. How many people have been to Bray Miller's next to 201 Ellicott? Think it's a good thing? So we develop programs that basically complement affordable housing projects. So basically that project, the Bray Miller's, is financed by a program called Rolling Community Investment Fund that basically can finance commercial community facility space as part of an affordable housing project. So I sometimes run into people, we've done crazy things like we did the Massachusetts Avenue Project's farm. I mean, it doesn't seem like an affordable housing project, right? It's next to a Push Housing Visions project, and so I can make a case it was related to that, and so I can do that. So if you want to do something in the community development affordable housing space, reach out to me, reach out to Paul, he can access me. I want to talk a little bit about home ownership, and I'm really excited about something I heard from Marjorie earlier today from Benedict. We have In Rochester, we have a fabulous partnership between the Rochester Land Bank and the Greater Rochester Housing Partnership. You want to hear an amazing fact? Between now and the last 20 years, the Greater Rochester Housing Partnership has facilitated 850 acquisition, rehabs, or sales to low and moderate people. How many, Marjorie? How many houses have been done in Bentley?
Around like rehab or
Yeah, both.
probably between 50 and 60.
Okay. This community needs a Greater Rochester Housing Partnership. We have a similar, slightly less numbers in the Syracuse Land Bank and home headquarters. They're like a rock star. I was so excited to hear that basically the county's recruited them to come into your community. They're Kerry Quaglia, housing headquarters, everything they're telling you, advertising, that, they're fantastic. Rural. You know, we had for many years an incredible partnership with the USDA. We've done, so basically, USDA had a program called Rural Development. And basically they financed multifamily projects in the rural communities. We partnered with them going back to 1982, even before I started. You know, so we have little projects that are existing in places like North Collins, Springville, Boston, Lancaster. The problem is that the federal government stopped participating in the program, and primary production path to do multifamily housing in rural areas is sort of off the table. We're doing a lot of work preserving them. Like, we're doing, like working with Conifer on their third portfolio project where we do 10 preservation projects at a time. We did 2 in the North Country, and now we're doing one in the southwest corner of the state, right?
Closing next week.
Cool. And another program, and this probably should be something on your radar screen for the rural sections of the state. There's a really wonderful program that is called the Section 502 mortgage program from USDA. It's usually our not-for-profits. I don't like Belmont or Southern. I don't even know if they're Southtown RFPC would collaborate with HCR and USDA to generate really inexpensive mortgages for ownership. Some of the things that are priorities for us and some oddball things you should think about. I just went to a ribbon cutting a month ago for a project called Skyview Apartments. We had this Erie County has some existing commercial malls. You guys have them there? You ever hear Walden Galleria, Boulevard, Eastern Hills? Are they struggling to keep their tenants in there? That valid? Well, we just renovated the Sears building, the Skyview Mall, with the town of Arundecoit to convert the Sears building into apartments with a brand new community center, almost as nice as this in the town of Arundecoit. And we're entertaining a new project in the Market View Mall in Henrietta, as well as one going thing. I have tried my best to get leverage with the Boulevard Mall, the Eastern Hills malls, that I read about in the paper. They're not but the reality is when they start losing money because they don't have adequate tenancy, they'll probably reach out to me. Some things that we really like that Erie County has a lot of, we love doing family housing projects in high-performing school districts. I was so excited that People Incorporated's Bloker project got I didn't know if we'd ever get pilot approved, but we got it through the village and the town. That's family housing in a high-performing school district. We believe, I'm an upper middle class person. I live in the city of Buffalo, but I said I like to get to public schools. It's a great world. He did well. If I didn't go well, I can move to Williamsville or East Aurora or Orchard Park. I didn't want to. I like living next to Delaware Park. But I was able to do that. The low and moderate people don't have that choice. So if I live in a bad school district, and I don't have the means to go to private schools, that's a problem. We love family projects, so we would love to do a family project in West Seneca, Orchard Park, East Aurora, Williamsville, Hamburg, whatever township it is, because to be honest with you, it's an issue of If you're, how many people here are parents or grandparents? Are you concerned about your kids' educations, or grandchildren's educations? If you lived in a poor community and you only had schools that weren't performing well as a choice, how would you feel about your role as a parent and grandparents? Not that good, right? The last thing I want to talk about is things, well, a couple things. One, a lot of our projects are used as the building block to provide support services. You know, increasingly, when I've analyzed, I've not been as analytical as Jason here about things, but my experience with people who are particularly below 30% of their income, it's absolutely dominated by households who have other things going on in life that create them not being economically successful. They have development disabilities, they have mental health issues, they have alcohol and substance abuse issues. They've been impacted negatively by the domestic violence issues. We develop housing that is used as a building block for program, not-for-profit groups to run services. You know, I see Josh there. I mean, how many OPWDD, HCR collaborations have you guys done?
5.
Right. You know, does it improve the quality of life for the citizens who live there? Right. That's why we do it. The last thing I want to do, and this is more of a Buffalo dynamic. So one of the Rochester stories that I think is really cool. How many people have followed that we're going to take down the Humboldt Parkway from Ferry to Best? People heard about that? So we did something like that in Rochester. So where the DOT took down the inner loop. Right now we've completed 3 and are under development on a 4th inner loop affordable housing project. You know, Susan and the Conifer folks are in a project called Southeast Tower. We're preserving and existing affordable housing, which is maybe 100 yards from the inner loop. Is that fair? We're in Syracuse, I'll finish up. In Syracuse, we're working on taking Route 81, I-81 down. We're working with the Housing Authority in the city to develop housing. And you're thinking about taking Humboldt Park, think about affordable housing. Governor Hochul does. She pointed out, when she goes to other communities, she talks about Humboldt Park and how they should do things like Rochester and Syracuse. I'm going to stop. I have, partly because I'm talking too long and I get a little sign up finished, but also I have a dentist appointment. So thank you very much. Again, reach out to me or reach out to Paul. Again, I want to give him cred for, you know, he can deliver me. I have horrible life-work balance issues. I work all the time. I start making emails at 5 o'clock in the morning. But you want the 5 a.m. version of me, not the 5 p.m.
So, Lenny, we thank you so much for coming. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for your advocacy in this issue. Join me in giving Lenny another round of applause. Thank you. Just to recap a little bit, friends, we heard from the county executive who has provided us with this kind of big picture vision. We heard from Karen to talk a little bit about how Live Well Erie's dedication to the social determinants of health, of which housing is a big part, is part of that big picture. We've heard from Jason then, who gave us a big overarching sense of what is happening all throughout Erie County. We heard from Lenny about who can help identify the partnerships and the finances that will help make it possible. And just to underscore Lenny's point, what I really heard from him was an invitation to be innovative, friends, an invitation to be thinking about any ideas in your community. It sounds to me like if you call Lenny with an idea, he's going to tell you how New York State can help bring your idea into a reality, a real invitation to innovate inside your community. So again, we heard that big picture, then we heard some of the funding pieces. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Frank Cerny. Dr. Frank is going to tell us a little bit about the human side of this story. So Frank Cerny earned his PhD in physiology and had a 40-year career as a scientist and professor at the University of Buffalo. He earned his Master's of Divinity degree in 2003 and found survey results showing many people living in poverty in the rural parts of Western New York. He and a group formed Pathways Christian Fellowship in 2006, an organization dedicated to alleviating poverty in the rural community, and went on to found the Rural Outreach Center, also known as ROC. Frank is now the director of the ROC, the Rural Outreach Center, and serves over 45,000 residents living in poverty in the southern part of Erie County and large parts of Wyoming, Allegheny, and Cattaraugus counties. Frank is going to talk to us about the human side of this big picture story. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Sermon.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the invitation. Rural poverty, rural issues have been called invisible poverty because there's very little attention paid to rural areas. Lenny mentioned his status in terms of retirement. I have 10 years on Lenny, and I'm standing here today while my wife is down in her cottage in Rushford because I feel very strongly about rural issues and rural poverty and addressing these rural issues. Back in the 70s, there were about 1,500 small family-owned farms that went out of business every month in the United States. That trend continues. It's like a bomb has gone off in our rural areas, been devastated, and people have nowhere to turn, transportation and all kinds of other issues. For the past 30 years, there's been very little private or public investment in rural areas, and we're seeing some of the consequences of that lack of attention and investment in some of the events, recent events that have taken place, including in Buffalo. Rural residents feel left out, they feel uncared for, they feel like nobody's listening to them. And when we come to housing issues, it's even more so. Let me tell you what we deal with. Most of the people that come to the ROC, the Rural Outreach Center, are living in absolute substandard housing. Many of them are in mobile homes that were built to last 15 to 20 years that are now in their 50th year. We have many of our participants who come to us because the mobile home park owners don't want to get out of the business of owning the mobile home. So they are forcing these residents to buy, with an added amount to their monthly rent, to buy their mobile homes. Now I want you to imagine, we talk about the wealth development in communities. I want you to imagine yourself having just invested $5,000 in a piece of junk. A mobile home that is 10 to 15 to 20 years over its due date. That's what we're dealing with. And I can't blame the mobile home park owners because they're in business too. But we have to find a way to get these people into different kind of housing. I have visited homes in our rural areas. Just one house in particular outside of Chaffee, delivering Christmas supplies for a family of 6. Grandma, grandpa trying to raise their grandchildren. And I walked into that house and I could see through the siding from the inside because the siding is so old, wooden siding is so old that it's shrunken, and they have no way to prevent the wind from blowing through their house. 6 kids trying to keep warm in a house like that through the winter. I have visited people way in the back rooms up off of Savage Road outside of Holland. This family has built a house with fieldstone. They've stacked fieldstone and they use cardboard to plug the holes in the stones. This is right here in Western New York, friends, right here in Erie County. Every winter we have people trying to get through the winter in tents and campers. We had one family, again, with 3 kids who had built a homemade yurt back in the woods someplace, and they were trying to get through the winter in that yurt. Right here in Western New York. This is stuff that we associate with Appalachia, but it's right here on our doorstep, and until recently, nobody has paid any attention to them. And I have to tell you how grateful I am. I've been a little bit of a squeaky wheel with Mark, but they're paying attention. And a couple months ago, Paul organized a webinar that Brad participated in, Jason and a couple of other folks. I heard what they were saying, and I said, we need to connect. And Paul has been absolutely amazing in bringing this group together to begin to address rural housing issues. So I'm really grateful to have a seat at the table and to be here this morning. And thank you for listening and paying attention.
Dr. Frank, thank you so much for putting a human face on exactly the issues that we're talking about. And thank you so much for keeping us on time. So again, another round of applause for Dr. Frank. So friends, we have a very brief break scheduled. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to ask that you help yourself to some more snacks, use the ladies' room, the men's room, whatever. Come back here at 10:15. At that time, we will have a presentation, kind of an overarching presentation about the maps that are in your folder. So each one of you, when you registered for this conference, you identified the town or municipality that you work with. And we developed a specific data set of information based on your municipality. So our Director of GIS Services, unfortunately, who developed this information, is not able to present to that. Nevertheless, we've got our Senior Economic Development Specialist, Zach Evans, who will give a kind of a brief presentation about that overarching information, and then we will move into our breakout sessions. So please, take a minute, relax, network a little bit, and we'll